Broadcasting live from the Newsmax studio in New York City, here is Steve Malzberg.
We're grateful, obviously, for the Egyptian initiative, for the Israeli efforts initially, but also this particular effort now has been significantly assisted by the input of Qatar, the input of Turkey, and the willingness of these foreign ministers to work hard, even though they were at a distance, and to engage directly with some of the Palestinian factions in order to try to help get us where we are today.
Just amazing. I mean, Qatar and Turkey, two enemies of Israel. No more Egypt, no Israel present at this the latest attempted a ceasefire agreement. And he expects Israel to sign on to this. I mean, it's insanity. Joining us now is Douglas Ernst, writer and digital editor for the Washington Times. We're not specifically going to talk much about this for long, but you wrote a great piece about ISIS threatening President Obama, which I want to get to. But Douglas, what's your take on what we saw from John Kerry? He's back in Washington now, but he was a disaster, was he not?
Yeah. The problem with this administration and certain people in it is they don't actually listen to Hamas. So the problem is, you have people for Hamas who their stated goal is the destruction of Israel. They say repeatedly that a truce is only time for them to get ready for the next attack. So I don't really have much faith in any sort of ceasefire agreements because they always use it just to come back and shoot rockets at Israel once again.
Yeah, I mean, I'm with you. I mean, the worst thing for Israel is a ceasefire. And from day one, Kerry was saying, well, we'll have a ceasefire and then we'll talk about the underlying issues. Well, what? We're going to talk about Hamas's demands during a ceasefire? What? I've never seen anything like this.
Yeah, it feels like we're in Bizarro World or Twilight Zone where, I think you were talking with Noah Rothman of Hot Air last week where, you have these people that they're the ones that are hiding weapons in schools and mosques and hospitals, but the moral outrage is all directed at Israel.
Yeah, and if you watch some of the networks that the UN school, which by the way Israel released a video showing them hit the single mortar shell falling in the courtyard, and Israel says it couldn't have killed anybody, and then the CNN reporter had to admit that they never saw anybody injured in the school. They only saw them coming out of the ambulances. Now, I'm not here to doubt it definitively, but I've seen over the years, from the Jenin massacre, which never happened, right on through to faking funerals and faking everything else. So I put nothing past this propaganda machine of the Palestinians. But I'm not saying they did fake it. I'm not saying these people didn't die, but if Israel says that nobody died in that mortar that in a deserted courtyard, then I'll side with Israel on that. Now let's go to ISIS. They threatened Barack Obama at the White House. We're coming for you. Douglas?
Yeah, last week, Eliza Slotkin, who's the acting principal deputy undersecretary of defense for policy at the Defense Department, she came out with this quote, "We're coming for you, Barack Obama." I don't know if this was from Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi or not, but they came out with this particular threat. And, it's just kind of interesting because 6 months ago, the president was saying these guys were the JV team. Just because someone puts on a Kobe Bryant jersey doesn't mean that they're actually one of the Lakers. And now all of a sudden it's a big deal. And I think President Barack Obama is the first Nobel Peace Prize winner to have policies that essentially kick-started an Islamic caliphate in the heart of the Middle East.
We now have indications, Douglas, that the administration knew that this was going to happen. They knew that ISIS was was planning to do this, that they would undertake it, that they would do it. They have done it. And, and then we find out, of course, that the president found out about it on television with everybody else, like everything else that he finds out about. But there were reports written last week that this would have been preventable if we were proactive. Now, I mean, all indications are there's a caliphate. And the caliphate is there, and it might grow and expand, and let that be a legacy of Barack Obama. And I don't get it.
Yeah, well, it's interesting because General James Amos, who was he just exited as the Marine Corps Commandant, a couple of weeks ago, he was at Brookings, the liberal think tank, and in a diplomatic way, he took Barack Obama to task for their Iraq policy and essentially said just that, that, you know, the administration dropped the ball.
They did drop the ball, and they dropped the ball big time. Now, let's talk about the Russians, and not necessarily right now the Russians and the rebels and Ukraine and what Putin is doing and is about to do to Ukraine and what he did to the plane. But let's talk about the Russians and what they're supplying to the Iraqi army.
Yeah, that's another instance where, for whatever reason, Barack Obama has a habit of kind of pushing our allies away, and then in that a vacuum forms, and then somebody else who's, you know, a worse character fills that void. So I don't really understand what's going on. They were begging the United States to help them with airstrikes, weapons, and those are all tied up in Congress. Congress doesn't want to give them more weapons, somewhat understandably. And so now the Russians are stepping up to the plate.
And yeah, and this is not the first time. I mean, my goodness, I don't think that Israel has many places to turn. Although nothing would shock me, because certainly this administration is pushing Israel away also. You know, Madeleine Albright, Douglas, said that the world is just a mess. The world is a mess. And I mean, I don't, you know, recall seeing, you know, I wasn't around for World War II, but I just don't recall seeing, the Cold War notwithstanding, so many trouble spots, so many hot spots, so much chaos as we have seen under Barack Obama throughout the world.
Yeah, if you were a Barack Obama voter in 2008 and 2012 and you're a single issue national security voter, you have to be asking yourself what happened. If you look all around the world, you know, whether it's Syria, Iraq, Ukraine, Northern Africa, Libya, we evacuated the U.S. Embassy over the weekend. It seems like the world's worst dictators and despots and all the worst actors are kind of emboldened by the administration. And this is sort of what you get when you have a lead from behind philosophy.
And you're right, Libya, we didn't even talk about Libya. And you know, there are people who say, and I have strategists on all the time, you know, I say, what does Hillary have to do to separate herself from Obama on foreign policy? Foreign policy, never a big factor in elections, especially presidential elections. I got to tell you, we're 2 years out, and I just don't see foreign policy not being a major part of the presidential scene in 2016, because the world is on fire, and eventually that fire is going to engulf the United States one way or another, and to ignore it or to say, well, people aren't going to care much about it in the presidential elections, I don't buy it this time around.
Yeah, I think a lot of people were under the illusion, you know, they bought into the line that it was that cowboy George W. Bush who was the cause of all the world's problems, and only if Barack Obama came in and kind of went on apology tours across the Middle East and pulled out all of America's skeletons out of its closet and apologized for real and imagined slights, that they would suddenly like us, that bad people would, you know, become good people. And that's just not how the world works. And I think there's a lot of, especially young Barack Obama voters, who are probably waking up to that fact.
Yeah, no, without a doubt. And Douglas, you know, finally on the border here at home, recent poll out today from The Economist /YouGov.com, 77% want the illegals who have come recently, unaccompanied children, sent back home. So, you know, the president might be about to sign an executive order giving amnesty to 6 million. That's not going to do too well for his party going forward either.
Yeah, a couple of weeks ago, there was a protest out of Chicago that was uploaded onto YouTube, and a lot of Chicagoans, the south side of Chicago, were livid at the president, saying that he was looking after illegal immigrants before he was looking after his hometown of Chicago. Granted, they wanted the federal government to give them, taxpayer dollars. But regardless, they were livid at the president.
Yeah. Yeah, we played those, and also a woman from Houston who was also just beside herself. All African-American people in both of those videos. Hey, Douglas, nice talking to you, sir. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Douglas Ernst, ladies and gentlemen, writer and digital editor for the Washington Times, here on the Steve Malzberg Show. The only thing Madeleine Albright has said since she's reemerged in the past week or so to trash Israel, the only thing she has said that I definitely agree with is that the world's a mess. The world is a mess, and particularly the Middle East is a mess. Libya, Syria, Iraq, you name it, and of course now Gaza, the whole thing. And who's in charge? Barack Obama. Give me 5 is next. Don't go away, folks.